Before I tell you anything else, I need you to picture a security camera. A cheap one, mounted above a dry cleaner's awning on Broad Street in Providence. The kind of camera nobody thinks about until the night it matters. At 2:14 a.m. on a Saturday, that camera recorded 43 seconds that would eventually land on my bench in my courtroom, and that I have now watched more times than I can count, more times, honestly, than I've watched almost anything in my professional life. Let me describe what's in that footage, because the details matter. There's a food cart parked in the frame, stainless steel, a flat-top grill bolted to the counter, a small undermounted refrigerator, and a sign across the front, hand-painted, not printed. You can tell by the slight unevenness of the letters, that reads Hank's Hot Dogs and More. The cart is chained to a post. A tarp is pulled over the grill for the night, tucked in at the corners, the way someone tucks in a child. That cart has sat in that exact spot 6 mornings a week for 11 years. At 2:14, a black BMW swings into frame and parks diagonally, taking up 2 spaces like the lines on the pavement are a suggestion rather than a rule. 3 young men climb out. They're loud, even without sound. You can see it in the way they move, the shoved shoulders, the exaggerated laughing. One of them walks straight to the cart like he's done this kind of thing before, in spirit if not in specifics. He yanks the tarp off. The other 2 drift over, laughing at something, and together the 3 of them start pushing the cart off the curb, into the street, wheels grinding against the asphalt. Then the one who pulled the tarp off draws his leg back and kicks the cart hard enough to tip it onto its side. The grill detaches on impact. The refrigerator door swings open. Condiments, wrapped buns, packets of relish and onion, all of it slides out across the pavement in a slow, glittering spill under the streetlight. The 3 of them are practically doubled over laughing now. One of them pulls out his phone and starts filming. Then they climb back into the BMW and drive off, taillights disappearing down Broad Street like nothing happened at all. 43 seconds, start to finish. That's the entire runtime of the thing that changed a man's life. Before I go further, if you're the kind of person who needs to know how a story like this ends before you can really settle into it, go ahead and hit subscribe now. I promise you, the ending is worth staying for. Every part of this is. Now let me tell you about the man who owned that cart. His name is Henry Olawale, 61 years old, a veteran of the United States Army, 14 years of active duty service, including a deployment to Kuwait during the Gulf War. When he came home and left the service, he didn't sit still. He spent 12 years working maintenance for the city of Providence, keeping public buildings running, fixing what broke, showing up early and leaving late, until a back injury on the job ended that chapter of his working life for good. Most people faced with that kind of injury at that stage of life would have folded into whatever assistance they could find and called it a life. Henry didn't do that. He took what savings he had, combined it with a small veteran's business loan, and bought a food cart. Not a restaurant, not a franchise, a cart. 11 years ago, he wheeled it out onto Broad Street for the first time and started selling hot dogs to whoever walked by. I want to be very clear about what that cart is, because it matters enormously to everything that follows. It is not a hobby. It is not a side hustle he does for fun on weekends. It is Henry Olawale's entire livelihood, the only one he has left. It is how he makes rent. It is how he affords the medication that manages the back injury that ended his previous career. It is quite literally how he eats. In every meaningful sense, that cart is everything Henry Olawale has left in the world that generates income. Now let me tell you about the young man who kicked it. His name is Bryce Kensington, 22 years old. His father is the managing partner at a commercial real estate firm. the kind of firm whose name appears on buildings downtown. Bryce drives a BMW that by itself costs more than Henry earns in 2 full years of 6-day weeks. He has never held a job. He has never had to. On the night in question, he was walking out of a bar where he and his friends had run up a $400 tab on drinks alone, an amount that would take Henry roughly 3 full days of standing behind that cart to earn. I'm going to tell you what happened when these two men, Henry Olawale and Bryce Kensington, ended up in the same courtroom on the same Tuesday morning. And I'm going to tell you about something on that security footage that Bryce Kensington's attorney very much did not want me to look at closely. Stay with me through the whole thing, because the details are where this story actually lives. And if the kind of story you come here for is exactly this one, the real, granular cost of contempt, and what happens when it finally runs into consequences, go ahead and subscribe now. It genuinely helps more than you'd think, and I'd like you to be here for the next one too. Henry found the wreckage at 5:30 inches the morning. That's his time. Every day, 6 days a week, 5:30 a. Rain or shine, to start prepping for the breakfast rush. He doesn't drive to the cart. He sold his car 3 years earlier when the insurance premiums stopped making financial sense, and since then, he's walked 14 blocks from a studio apartment to that corner of Broad Street, pulling a rolling cooler full of the day's supplies behind him like a man towing his own small business behind his heels. On that particular Saturday, he turned the corner onto Broad Street the way he had 10,000 mornings before, and instead of a chained, tarp-covered cart waiting patiently for him, he found it lying on its side in the middle of the road. The grill was detached and skewed at an angle. The propane tank had been disconnected and was lying in the gutter like discarded trash. Buns, hot dogs, onions, relished the entire day's supply, purchased the afternoon before with money he could not afford to spend twice, was scattered across the asphalt, some of it already run over, some of it soaking into a puddle near the curb. His hand-painted sign, the one he'd made himself, was cracked clean across the middle. A witness, the owner of the dry cleaning shop next door, who happened to be opening early that morning, later described Henry as standing completely, unnervingly still, not speaking, not moving toward the cart or away from it, just standing at the edge of the wreckage, staring at it the way a person stares at something when their mind is trying and failing to construct an explanation that makes sense of what their eyes are seeing. The dry cleaner called the police. An officer arrived, took a report, noticed the security camera mounted above the strip mall, and requested the footage. It didn't take long to get answers. The footage was sharp enough to read the BMW's license plate and clear enough to make out all 3 faces. Bryce Kensington was identified within hours of the report being filed. He was not arrested. Before any charges were formally filed, his father's attorney had already been in contact with the department, arranging what I can only describe as a remarkably soft landing. Bryce would turn himself in voluntarily. He would be polite and cooperative. He would be released on his own recognizance almost immediately. No handcuffs, no booking photo, no real inconvenience of any kind. Henry Olawale, meanwhile, was trying to figure out how he was going to survive the weeks ahead. The damage came in at an estimated $4,200. The grill was ruined beyond simple repair. The refrigerator's compressor had cracked, the frame itself was bent out of true, the sign needed to be entirely repainted or replaced, and every bit of food inventory he'd bought the day before was gone spoiled, crushed, or simply unusable. Henry did not have $4,200 sitting anywhere. He'd looked into insuring the cart years earlier and decided the premiums weren't something his margins could absorb, so there was no insurance payout coming. His total savings amounted to roughly $600. He had no credit cards to fall back on. He had no family nearby who could step in and help bridge the gap. And here's the trap, the one that people who have never lived close to the edge of their finances often don't fully register. Without the cart, he had no income. Without income, he couldn't pay to fix the cart. Without a fixed cart, he couldn't generate the income needed to fix it. It's a closed loop, and it is, in my experience, the single most brutal structural feature of poverty. Once something breaks, everything around it breaks too, because there was never enough slack in the system to absorb a shock in the first place. Henry reached out to a veterans assistance organization for help. They were able to assist him with filing his civil claim, but their funding was earmarked for housing and medical support, not business equipment. So there was nothing more they could do on the repair side, which meant Henry waited. He waited for a court date. He waited without income. He waited without his cart, the thing he'd built, morning by morning over 11 years. He waited 6 weeks. I want to spend a moment on what 6 weeks without income actually means for a man in Henry's position, because it's easy to hear 6 weeks and picture something manageable, a rough patch, a tightened belt, a temporary inconvenience. That is not what it means. It means choosing week after week between paying rent and buying food. It means watching savings that took years to accumulate evaporate within days. It means calling a landlord to explain, as calmly as you can manage, that rent will be late because a stranger destroyed the only thing that generates your income for entertainment at 2 in the morning. It means lying awake, wondering if the life you spent over a decade building the cart, the daily rhythm, the regulars who know your order before you ask, the specific patch of sidewalk that has belonged to you for 11 years is simply over. During those 6 weeks, Henry fell behind on rent and received a formal eviction warning. He skipped refilling one of his prescriptions because he couldn't afford both the medication and groceries in the same week. He ate at a soup kitchen 4 separate times. A man who had spent 11 years feeding other people found himself standing in a food line because a 22-year-old with a BMW decided that 43 seconds of entertainment was worth destroying the machine that kept Henry Olawale alive. The case reached my courtroom on a Tuesday morning. Henry arrived at 9:15, 45 minutes early. He was wearing a suit not new, not expensive, but clearly maintained with real care over a long stretch of years. The kind of suit a person keeps pressed and brushed because it's one of the few things they own that still looks the way it's supposed to. The jacket hung slightly loose on him, which told me something before he ever said a word. He'd lost weight recently, and not by choice. Those 6 weeks without income had cost him roughly 15 pounds. His shoes were polished to a shine. His posture was unmistakably military, spine straight, shoulders level, the kind of bearing that stops being a discipline you practice and becomes simply the way your body holds itself after 14 years of service. He carried a folder under one arm. Inside it were photographs documenting the damage, a written repair estimate, his financial records, his discharge papers from the Army, and the business permit that had let him operate that cart legally for 11 straight years. He'd also brought one more thing, which I wouldn't see until later in the hearing. Bryce Kensington arrived at 10:02, 2 minutes past the scheduled start. He wore a sport coat that likely cost more than Henry's monthly rent. Beside him was his attorney, William Ashworth, a name I recognized immediately, because Ashworth has built a career representing wealthy families in cases like this one, cases where the entire objective is to make the problem disappear with as little friction, cost, and public consequence as possible. Bryce did not look at Henry once. He sat down at the defense table and checked his phone. I called the case. Henry presented first, without an attorney of his own. He spoke plainly the way people speak after 14 years of both giving and taking orders, when clarity has become more valuable to you than polish. He walked me through the cart, his daily routine, the morning he found it in the road. He described the 6 weeks that followed in the same measured, unhurried voice. The eviction warning, the skipped prescription, the soup kitchen visits. Then he laid out the numbers. Repair estimate, $4,200. Monthly income from the cart, on a good month, roughly $2,000. Monthly expenses, roughly $1,800, which leaves a monthly surplus of about $200 when everything is working, when nothing breaks, when nobody destroys your only source of income on a Saturday at 14 inches the morning. He asked for the repair costs plus 6 weeks of lost income, calculated at approximately $500 a week, $3,000, combined with the $4,200 in repairs. His total ask came to $7,200. That was it. He did not ask for pain and suffering. He did not ask for punitive damages. He asked precisely and only for what had actually been taken from him, the cost of fixing what was broken, and the income he would have earned had it never been broken in the first place. I noted that, and I want you to notice it too. A man who had served his country for 14 years, who had just described being wronged in a manner most people would call outrageous, walked into that courtroom and asked for exactly what he was owed, not a dollar more. That restraint told me more about who Henry Olawale is than almost anything else in that hearing. Then it was William Ashworth's turn, and his argument was smooth in the particular way that only comes from years of practice. The kind of argument that reframes a destroyed livelihood as a minor billing dispute between reasonable parties. He acknowledged that his client had made a mistake. He characterized the entire incident as youthful indiscretion, fueled by alcohol. Nothing more sinister than that. He offered to cover the $4,200 in repair costs outright, and then suggested the lost income claim was speculative food cart revenue fluctuates seasonally, he argued. And Mr. Olawale couldn't prove with certainty he would have earned exactly that amount during those 6 weeks. Your Honor, he said, my client is a young man from a good family who made a poor decision after a night of drinking. He's prepared to take responsibility and make Mr. Olawale whole. We believe the repair costs represent a fair resolution. I let him finish. Then I said, Mr. Ashworth, I'd like to see the security footage. Okay, if you've made it this far into the story, do me a favor and hit subscribe. Not for me, for Henry. It'll make sense by the time we get to the end, I promise you. The footage played, all 43 seconds of it, the BMW, the 3 young men, the laughing, the tarp coming off, the cart being pushed into the street, the kick, the cart tipping over, the phone coming out to film it, the BMW pulling away. I watched it once through in silence, and then I had it played a second time. When it ended, I said, Mr. Kensington, I'd like to hear from you directly. Not your attorney, you. Tell me what happened that night. Bryce glanced sideways at Ashworth, who gave him a small, permitting nod. Bryce said, we were coming from a bar. We'd been drinking. We saw the cart and thought it'd be funny to mess with it. I didn't think it would cause that much damage. You thought it would be funny, I said. Yes, you thought it would be funny to destroy a man's livelihood. He had nothing to say to that. Silence. I said, Mr. Kensington, do you know what Mr. Olawale does for a living? He has a food cart, Bryce said. He has a food cart, I repeated. That cart is his only source of income. He's operated it for 11 years. He built that business with his own savings and a veteran's loan. After a back injury ended the career he had before it. He served 14 years in the United States Army, including a deployment to Kuwait, and you thought it would be funny to kick his livelihood into the street. Bryce shifted in his seat, and I let the silence sit there for a moment before continuing. I noticed something else in the footage, I said. After you kicked the cart over, one of your friends started filming on his phone. Did that video get posted anywhere? Nothing from Bryce. Mr. Kensington, did your friend post that video? I think he put it on his story, Bryce said quietly. His Instagram story. So you destroyed a veteran's food cart at 2 in the morning, and then it went up on social media as entertainment. He didn't respond to that either. I turned to Henry. Mr. Olawale, you brought something in that folder besides the photographs and the estimate. May I see it? Henry opened the folder and drew out a single photograph, holding it up so the courtroom could see. It showed the food cart on its very first day of operation, 11 years earlier. Henry stood beside it in the picture, smiling, wearing an apron, visibly younger. The sign, Hank's Hot Dogs and More, was freshly painted, the letters crisp and even. The cart itself gleamed, brand new. And tucked into the corner of the frame, almost easy to miss, was a small American flag taped to the cart's handle. This was the first day, Henry said. I'd just gotten the loan approved. I painted that sign myself at my kitchen table the night before. I didn't know if anyone would even come, but they did. And they kept coming for 11 years. He lowered the photograph back into the folder. The courtroom went quiet, in a way that courtrooms rarely go quiet. Not the routine hush of procedure, but something heavier. I looked at Bryce Kensington and said, Mr. Kensington, this man served his country for 14 years. He came home and built a life. When that life was taken from him by an injury, he built another one, a food cart he ran for 11 years, 6 mornings a week, starting at 5:30 a.m. He walks 14 blocks to reach it because he can no longer afford a car. He earns $2,000 a month. His entire monthly cushion is $200. And you and your friends, after spending $400 on drinks in a single night, more than Mr. Olawale earns in an entire week, decided that his cart was something worth destroying for a video. I continued. Your attorney called this a youthful indiscretion. I'm going to describe it differently. This was contempt. Contempt for a man you never bothered to think about. Contempt for work you have never once had to do yourself. Contempt for a life you assumed didn't matter because it didn't resemble your own. I issued my ruling. I awarded Henry the full $4,000, $200 in repair costs, the full $3,000 in lost income, and an additional amount in damages that reflected the severity of the conduct, the vulnerability of the person harmed, and Bryce's behavior, both during and after the incident, specifically the decision to post footage of the destruction to social media, which told me plainly that this had never been treated as an accident. It had been treated as content. The total figure was substantial, noticeably more than Ashworth had walked in expecting. Ashworth rose immediately. Your Honor, the additional damages seem excessive for what amounts to the deliberate destruction of a veteran's only livelihood, filmed and shared for entertainment, I said. The damages stand. Please sit down. Then I did something I don't always do from the bench. I looked directly at Henry and said, Mr. Olawale, this ruling will make sure you receive what you're owed, but I'm also going to connect you through our court liaison with the Veterans Business Assistance Program. They can help move the repair process along and get you back on that corner as quickly as possible. You shouldn't have to sit through a slow collection process just to get your livelihood back. Henry, who had stayed composed through the entire hearing, who had described losing his income and nearly losing his housing without his voice ever cracking, put a hand briefly over his eyes. Thank you, Your Honor, he said. I wasn't expecting that. I know you weren't, I told him. That's part of why I did it. If this story is landing the way I suspect it is, go ahead and subscribe now. There's more where this came from, and I'd genuinely like you to be here for it. I've thought about this case a great many times in the months since. I think about the 43 seconds. That's the entire span of time it took to unravel something a man had spent 11 years constructing, one early morning at a time. 43 seconds of amusement for 3 young men who likely forgot about it within a week, set against 11 years of labor from a man who will remember it for the rest of his life. I think about that photograph, Henry standing next to a brand new cart, a freshly painted sign, a small flag taped to the handle, the pride sitting plainly in his face, the hope before he had any way of knowing whether the whole thing would work. 11 years of 5:30 mornings, 14 block walks in every kind of weather, breakfast rushes, and slow, quiet afternoons, and the specific, ordinary dignity of feeding people with your own 2 hands, day after day, for over a decade. I think about the Instagram story, about a man's entire livelihood being reduced to a few seconds of content for other people to scroll past. I think about the assumption sitting underneath that decision, unspoken, maybe not even consciously held, but present all the same, that some people's work simply doesn't count as real, that a food cart on a street corner isn't a real business the way a real estate firm with its name on a downtown building is a real business, that some lives exist in the eyes of certain other people, primarily as material for other people's entertainment. I think about the $400 spent on drinks that night and how that figure maps almost exactly onto 2 full days of Henry's labor. I think about the particular structural cruelty embedded in a world where one person's bar tab can equal another person's ability to survive the month. And I think about something Henry said to me in the hallway afterward, once the formal proceedings had ended. He said, "Your Honor, I'm not angry at the boy. I'm disappointed. Because I was 22 once too. I was in the Army at 22. I was carrying a rifle in a desert at 22. And this kid is out kicking food carts at 22 because he's bored." He paused for a moment and then added, quietly, "I'm not angry, I'm just tired." Then he walked off down the hallway, slowly, because his back still bothers him, the same back injury that ended his first career and led him eventually to build the cart that Bryce Kensington destroyed for a video. I've sat on this bench for more than 40 years. In that time, I have heard thousands of cases. I've seen genuine cruelty. I've seen real kindness. And I've seen, far more often than either of those, the vast, indifferent middle ground where most ordinary human behavior actually lives. But I have rarely encountered the exact combination this case presented a man who had virtually everything, casually destroying something that belonged to a man who had almost nothing, for no reason beyond the amusement of the moment. It wasn't malice, exactly. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even indifference in the purest sense. It was something closer to a total unexamined assumption that the cart simply didn't matter, because the man who owned it had never registered in Bryce Kensington's mind as someone who mattered either. I've since learned that Henry's cart was fully repaired within 2 weeks of the ruling. The Veterans Liaison Office moved quickly on his behalf. Henry is back on Broad Street 6 mornings a week, 5:30 a.m., same as always. The sign has been repainted. The small American flag is back on the handle, right where it's always been. I've also learned that Bryce Kensington's video was viewed by roughly 12,000 people before it was eventually taken down. 12,000 people watched a veteran's only source of income get destroyed for entertainment. Some of them laughed. Some of them shared it further. As far as I know, not one of them stopped to ask who owned that cart or what happened to him afterward. All right, do me one more favor before we finish here. Hit subscribe, and if you can, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one of these. Thank you, genuinely, for sticking with this all the way through. Tell me in the comments what you think. I do read every single one. I want to know, where are you watching this from? What would you have done, in my position or in Henry's? Henry Olawale walks 14 blocks every single morning to reach a food cart he built with his own 2 hands after 14 years of serving his country. He earns roughly $2,000 a month. He keeps a photograph of the cart's very first day tucked inside a folder, just in case anyone ever needs to be reminded of how far it's come. Bryce Kensington drove home that night in a BMW and posted the video before he went to sleep. That's what this case was actually about. Not property damage, not a youthful indiscretion, contempt in the real, human cost it imposes on the people who are left to absorb it. I don't know whether Bryce Kensington took anything away from that Tuesday morning. I don't know if the judgment changed anything in him or if his father simply paid the amount and the two of them moved on, Bryce never giving Henry Olawale another thought. If I'm honest, I suspect the latter, because real change requires real discomfort. And people with enough money can very often buy their way out of discomfort before it ever has the chance to teach them anything at all. But I know this much for certain. Henry is back on Broad Street, the sign is repainted, the flag is on the handle. He still walks 14 blocks every morning because he can't afford a car. And he does it anyway without complaint, the way he's done it for 11 years running. I'm Judge Judy. If you like this type of story, hit subscribe button.